Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back to the world of Forza Motorsport 3. As I've said, one of my lesser favourites of the franchise, but still a game which had some notable cars that were never featured again. And also some notable differences within cars that were featured in other games but then changed compared to previous games. Sometimes the performance changed, sometimes the prices change, sometimes what you can do to the cars would change. Of course, in the case of, arguably more so than anything else, the Mazda Lola. Look at the huge difference between the tuning on that car in Forza 3 compared to all of the other games. It's an absolute monster, and it's never been as fast since. A car like this, on the other hand, is a little bit different, because this is the kind of car which, incidentally, has been featured before, and I initially was going to do a review for this in Forza 2. However, this is one of the very few, extremely few, aftermarket tuner cars that were featured in Forza 3, because as many of you know, Forza 2 had a great selection. You had the APR Celica, the Silver Bullet, the Sparco Evo, the Mines models, the Tommy Kyra, and a lot of those were left behind. It was just the very few, like the Mines and the Top Secret models, that were actually carried over. And then for whatever reason, this was one of the ones that they did choose to carry over, but this unfortunately is as far as it went. Now, for any fan of the Toyota MR2, which of course this is, what I've always thought looked like a mini Ferrari F355, you're going to like this one, in particular if you liked it on Forza 2, because there is a huge difference between this car in Forza 2 compared to in Forza 3, and that difference is the price. And the price difference is kind of ridiculous, let's be honest, because in Forza 2 it had a value of 101,000 credits, which is ridiculous for a car that has 255 horsepower. However, now in Forza 3 it's 11 grand, which is insane. If you compare the two games, why would they drop it by 90 grand? That makes no sense whatsoever, but there you go. And it's pretty cool that they did, because now that's actually much more reasonable, because now you can use what was so good about the car anyway in Forza 2 as an example, but without having to unlock it or pay out that kind of money for something which, let's be honest, fandom aside, is not worth that much. It should not have been that expensive in the first place. It's not a six-figure car. In fact, you could argue that a lot of the tuner cars in Forza 2 were not six-figure cars. So with that in mind, and with the significant drop in price now to make it in effect on par with a normal MR2 or even some hot hatches, well, having an aftermarket tuner car, a pre-tuned car in effect, well, literally it is a pre-tuned car, at the same kind of price range as, say, a used sports car or a lower level hot hatch, that could be a very interesting advantage to have, depending on how good a car it is. Well, it is an advantage, because for one thing, the category is nice and low. It's a 2 litre, as I said, 255 horsepower, 239 pound-feet of torque. These MR2s have always been great for torque. The weight is not ridiculously high. It's not as light as you might think. It's not under a ton. It weighs 1,187 kilos, so that's not too bad. It's not great. It's still more than something like a TVR, for instance, but it's not ridiculous. You can certainly work with it. And the category is only C, 356 PI. So for 11 grand you've got a really low category sports car with a great amount of power for what it is, and of course the MR2 is already great anyway, so an aftermarket one could well be even better. And so the real question is, of course, is it? Is it good? Is it worth buying? Well, I have to say it's the kind of car that I appreciate more now than I did back then. I bought Forza 3 when it was released, and I liked it at the time, but there were plenty of cars that I never got around to, and I don't believe back then I ever drove this car in any of the Forza games, not just Forza 3, but I kind of wish that I had, because for certain events, in particular in career mode of course, but also online potentially, it could have been a really useful tool. Not necessarily without doing anything to it, although you could race it like that if you want to, but in particular if you tune it up for C-Class. Maybe if you want to take it up to B class, but be more cautious with that, because once you get to B or above, you start getting some real gems, whereas in the lower classes it tends to be more like small sports cars, hatchbacks, sleeper cars, and this kind of falls into that category, which is ironic given that it's tuned with decals and a crazy paint job compared to the production model. So how could this possibly be a sleeper? Well, in a funny kind of way, it's a sleeper for the exact reason that I just said. I never used it, and plenty of people never used it. I never saw anyone use this car in a race online. Now, I'm sure there were people who did, of course. Plenty of people probably did, but the point is, I never saw that happen, and from all the friends that I used to race with, online people who I used to often meet, I would never hear any chatter about cars like this, but of course this one in particular, and that is where a car like this can come into its own, because the advantage of having a huge community playing a particular racing game is ironically also a disadvantage. And what I mean by that is that having so many minds, so many gifted minds, working on the problem of what is the best car to use in what class is a great thing if you're looking for what the best ones are very quickly, because people will be able to try loads of different things, and very quickly the community as a whole will work its way up to the best ones, and then those tend to be the cars that people use the most. For instance, NASCARs for oval events, or the Pagani Zonda R in R2 and Forza 4, stuff like that. There are cars that stand out very quickly, or the Mazda 787B and the Peugeot 905 always being the go-to options for technical circuits, that kind of thing. The disadvantage of that, though, is it means that there could be cars which no one uses, and it stays that way, because the overwhelming majority of people end up using the same one, and that makes newcomers to the game who haven't gone through that process of trying everything assume, well, if everyone's using that, then that must be A, the best option, and B, what's the point of trying anything else, because I probably won't be able to beat them. And that's not true, because that is the exact sweet spot where vehicles like this can come into play. A car which doesn't promise you the world, it's just a good little sports car. So overall, I would say that a car like this, the Tonne's T020, of course based on the MR2, it's not a car that's necessarily going to rock your world. It's got decent handling, decent performance, it's not going to melt your face or blow your mind, but it's just that. It's cheap, it's low-classed, and it's fast. So it's worth checking out, not so much for the online side of things now, but more so for career mode. So if you do get the chance to check out this, I would say it's actually kind of a bargain in Forza 3 because of that huge price drop. It made it go from an ultimate collector's piece, in effect, within the aftermarket class, to being this affordable little sleeper car. So it's worth checking out for that, if nothing else. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.